Welcome to the Book of Nehemiah. As we see here, it begins where it mentions and talks about how the city of Jerusalem was all destroyed. Nothing had been rebuilt. So this would have had to have been early on before all the people started going back. Went through Ezra, and it went how the people left and numbered them by 50,000 and named the people and so forth, and they went back and had problems with the people of the area, the Samaritans and so forth. So here, because of the condition of Jerusalem, I would say this was almost going back and to be synonymous with Ezra in an early time. And Ezra was a priest, and Nehemiah, as far as I know, was not a priest. At the last verse, says he was a wine bearer to the king, Inokos, and the Wikipedia has certain things about Nehemiah. It says in the Septuagint, it calls him Evnikos, which is a eunuch, but that does not appear in the texts that I have, and it does not appear in my 1709 Bose Bible, which has all the variants of that. So I'm not exactly sure where they've get this Eunuchos, and then it says he was cupbearer to King Artaxerxes, but as we see, Artaxerxes, it doesn't mention Artaxerxes in Numbers. So those two things in Wikipedia, I believe, are wrong. If you go there and read them. But it begins the words of Nehemiah, son of Halkiu. And it came to pass in the month of Chislev, of the 20th year, that I was in Susa Avirah. Now, the kings, the 20th year of the king of, it wouldn't have been Cyrus, he was gone. The next one would have been Xerxes, and I believe that's probably when it was the last of his reign. Otherwise, it would go way, way down to the 20th year of the Artaxerxes, which is spelled out in the book of Esther, and I would think if it was that Artaxerxes, they would have spelled it out in Nehemiah, which they didn't. They have Arthasasta, and we'll get to that, and you'll see that. But the he was in Susan Avirah, and the palace is this word means a palace apparently, and Susa was a main city in Persia, and there came Anani, one from my brothers, he and men of Judah. So they come from the area of Jerusalem, so forth, and I asked them concerning the Jews having survived, the ones who were not taken by Nebuchadnezzar earlier, and whoever was left, who are left behind from the captivity of Nebuchadnezzar, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, well, the ones remaining behind, surviving from the captivity of Nebuchadnezzar, there in the place are among great wickedness, mega, great. And in scorning, they were looked down upon, as the Jews were that came back to Israel. They were there in the 30s and the 20s and the 30s, and they were scorned by the Muslims in the 1920s and 30s and so forth. And the walls of Jerusalem are being demolished, and its gates were burnt by fire. Pyromaniac, a pyre, comes from that word there. So here it's showing that the walls is demolished and the gates were burned by fire. So this is at the very beginning. It would have been the same as what Ezra would have came back. Ezra may have actually been later, after Nehemiah went there first. And it came to pass in my akuse, hearing, acoustics is a derivative, these words, I sat and wept and mourned for days, and I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. So he was like Ezra, where he was fasted, tore his clothes, was weeping, and also this man was mourning. Now, it's interesting in that the people that were there in Jerusalem and Israel, not everybody was doing the evil thing or was against God, but God destroyed it because basically, I believe it was the priesthood and the leaders who they were making the decisions, and the people suffered because of their bad decisions, as happened throughout history, where the peoples have suffered because of monarchs and politicians and so forth. And so there were these people that did love God, and this man Nehemiah and Ezra, when they were in Babylon, they loved God. And so there are these ones of the diaspora that did love God. And I said, Oh, indeed, O Lord God of the heaven, Uranu, the strong and the megas, great, and phoveros, whenever you see the phobe has to do with fear, phobia, fearing, guarding the covenant and the mercy to the ones loving him and guarding his commandments. He is merciful to those that love him. Now, he's also merciful to people that don't love him, but I believe that the mercy is shown more towards the people that do love him. Now, there are people that love him and go through terrible things, worse circumstances than the people that don't love him, so that you would say, well, that's not merciful. He's actually treating them more harshly. So, yes, that is true, but the mercy that God is giving is something, I think, that a person that is receiving it knows that it is something special from God. And just to be given good things and have everything go great and not know God and care less about God, it's not really mercy. It's just they're treated better than other people that are Christians or the Jews that believe that went along with God. But the mercy was to the ones that God cared about, and I believe there was a relationship between a person receiving mercy. Now, it doesn't mean, like I said, a person can receive good things from God and be doing bad, evil. But the ones loving him and guarding his commandments. So let it be indeed your ear heeds, and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your bondman, which I pray before you today's day. Now, he's giving God here anthropomorphic attributes of ears and eyes, and God in his form is way beyond anything of human, I believe, but yet he uses these human instruments. Nehemiah uses these human instruments with God that man can relate to, and he can relate to God. Otherwise, how could you pray to God if it was something you didn't understand or know? Then I suppose you would be like other religions that the God is something that's unknowable. But yet, with the Jews and the Christian God, there is a amount of exposure to what God is and who he is in his word. And Jesus calls him a father, a male. He's not a mother. And so Jeremiah here, let your ears hear and your eyes open to hear the prayer of your bondman, which I pray before you today's day and night. For the sons of Israel, your bondmen. That is, if they are considered bondmen. There's probably a lot of people that don't consider themselves bondmen of God. So I would imagine that would put them outside of the special relationship of a bondman to his master. the bondman would know who the master is, and the master would tell him to jump, and he says how high. Has complete obedience to the master, and this is what makes a bondman. Otherwise, you would not be a bondman. You would be, if you didn't do what he said, you'd be in rebellion, anarchy. And I declare openly concerning the sins of the sons of Israel, in which we sinned against you, and he's putting that them together with himself, even though he wasn't there and maybe didn't sin, but the people that he's praying for. Even I and the house of my father sinned. So there, apparently he did do something enough to yoke himself to the other people that were sinned, whether he did or himself, or he's acknowledging that the house of his father did sin. In parting, we parted from you. They went into idolatry, he's talking about, and guarded not the commandments, and that would be in the Torah, and the orders, and the judgments which you gave to Moses, your servant, in the Torah, Mount Sinai, and afterwards. And we didn't, we did not guard these. We didn't pay attention to what these things were. And it says, remember indeed the word which you gave charge to Moses, your servant. Remember these words, saying, if you should break contract, I will disperse you among the peoples. But if you should return to me, and should guard my commandments and observe them, and if your dispersion might be unto the tip of the heaven, from there I will gather them, and I will bring them into the place which I chose to encamp my name there. Now, if these people have returned. Now, I would question, has Israel fulfilled this prerequisite of God with Moses, if they should return to the Lord? And I don't see Israel returning to the Lord. To me, it's this people coming back to this ancient homeland, and they haven't built a temple or done any of these things which Nehemiah and Ezra did right away. And it's been 70 years, generation. So God will bring them back if they do come to him. And they are your children and your people, whom you ransomed by your great power. And he ransomed them from Egypt when he brought them out of slavery. That's the mentioning of the ransoming of the people of Israel. And we are ransomed by Jesus Christ, by his paying the price, his crucifixion, death, and resurrection, in ransoming us by the blood payment, the blood that was poured out by him, by Jesus. This is our ransom. And so they're ransomed by your great power and by your fortified hand. Indeed, O Lord, let be your ear heeding to the prayer of your bondman and to the prayer of your children wanting to fear your name. Now, I imagine there is a lot of Jews, as there is today, that care less about God and fearing his name and wanting to do the things of God. And we see this as the case by the time that Jesus arrived, that they didn't want anything to do with the prophet that was sent to them, did all these miracles, yet they didn't want anything to do with him, and some of them they didn't have enough courage to kill him themselves, and they caused the ruler of the Romans, Pontius Pilate, to do their dirty work. But yet they said, the blood be upon us and our children. So there are those people after this time that did go along. A lot of them believed in Jesus. Thousands and thousands, 5,000 at one time, Jews became Christians and probably fled after the Romans came and so forth. And he continues and he says, and prosper the way indeed of your servant today, and I give him for compassions before this man, and that man would be the king. And it says, and I was an inachus to the king. And he mentions giving him wine when we get to the second chapter. Next, video seminar. I don't see where he would say, I was a eunuch to the king, although they found, I think it was the three uncials have that, but none of the other, none of the books that I have, the texts that I have, and I have quite a few, have that in there. And if he was a eunuch, then he wouldn't have anything to do with the temple. I don't even know if the eunuchs could go into the temple. They might, but they certainly couldn't become priests or have anything to do with the priesthood. But we'll get into the next chapter and his relationship to the king. And it's goes in right here, chapter 2, Jeremiah asked permission to rebuild Jerusalem. So hope you'll join us in chapter 2 and going through the book of Nehemiah. God bless.